Welcome into this week's edition of the Block CourageCast, and our training camp whip-around coverage continues, and we go to the NFC for the first time this time around to talk about the NFC East, and there's four really interesting teams that we cannot wait to get into that with a couple special guests. I'm your host, Dave Stomwettle. Wally Williams is off this week. He is coaching in a preseason game right now for the high school he coaches at, but it's okay. My guy, DB, is back this week. Dwayne Brooks, been a while since he's been on. He's back. How you doing, sir?
I'm pretty good, Dave. How are you? How's everything going with your team?
So far, so good. Very young team. Make a lot of mistakes, but growing pains. The one thing I get very tired of very quickly are the kids that, like, when they screw up, they want to, like, put their hands on their helmet, or they want to make a show that they screwed up. Like, no, thank you. Don't need that. You screwed up. Just let's get back to the huddle and let's play. So before we're going to take a quick break here. We have a word from this week's Courage House Spotlight is the Dallas Cowboys Courage House, Happy Hill Farms.
Oh, wow.
Your thoughts on the NFC East as a whole before we take a break, DB, is what?
Well, I'm expecting good things from the Commanders this year. I like what they did. I agree with you. I like what they did with the draft. I like the new coach. But everybody else is thinking it's going to be between Dallas and Philly, and not giving the Giants that much of a chance. But I'm interested to see what the Commanders do this year. That's who I'm looking at.
The other one that is so interesting is Philadelphia, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Right.
The sort of what happened, what transpired now, what does it look like this year after everything that happened? We'll get into all of that. Dallas is in an interesting spot. This is a very interesting division, maybe with the exception of the Giants, and we'll talk about the Giants a little bit later on. But this is, in terms of the NFC, this is probably the most interesting top to bottom division to look at and to talk about. And it sort of feels like I wouldn't be shocked if there's if a Commanders doesn't happen to come up and surprise people this year, because of some of the question marks with the other teams that we're going to get into. We're going to take a break. We're going to start our NFC East preview right after a word from this week's Courage House Spotlight, and that would be our friends from Happy Hill Farms down in Dallas. Welcome back to the Ed Block CourageCast. Dave Steinwettle and my guy, Dwayne Brooks, back here with you this week as we start the NFC East whip around training camp preview, and we are going to the closest one to us, and that would be down in Landover, Maryland, with the Washington Commanders in a full offseason rebuild. Ron Rivera no longer there. Now Dan Quinn takes over. They brought in a lot of pieces. It looks like it's going to be Jane Daniel as the quarterback week one for the Commanders. So, DB, the initial reaction you have to everything that happened this past offseason with the Commanders would be what?
Excited. I'm super excited. We got the Heisman Trophy winner in the house. I think his quarterback debut went well. So it's interesting to see what he's going to do, how long he's going to last, how many hits he's going to take. But I am excited to see him under center. So that alone right there, that excites me. But you got Dan Quinn, who's a defensive-minded coach, so it'll be interesting to see what happens on that side of the ball as well. But I am really excited about the quarterback, though. Really excited about him.
Yeah, so, like, Jane Daniel, to me, such an interesting prospect because of the arm's there. There's no question about Jane Daniel with his arm talent at this level. My little bit of a concern I have when it comes to Jane Daniel is he takes those unnecessary hits if you watch his college tape.
Right.
Little bit of that lack of sliding more. Hey, I'm going to try to lower my shoulder and I'm going to try to pick up that 2 to 3 yards extra. And we were having this conversation on this show 2 weeks ago when we were talking about Anthony Richardson of the Colts, who's now put more weight on. So when I
Right.
look
He
at
was already
Jaden,
big.
yeah, a big kid that already's had a shoulder injury
Right.
to the throwing arm. Now you have Jane Daniel, which he's not big like Anthony Richardson. So my question for you, DB, we kind of sit here and think about this. If you're a trainer and you watch the tapes on Jane Daniels and you see, all right, athletic kid, makes plays, maybe not always are you maybe one of the guys that pulls him aside some point and says, hey, like maybe you should consider like protecting yourself a little bit when you run?
Yes. 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 I've been around long enough where I've talked to some veterans about some things that I do see. Uh, and I might make a suggestion, but yes, at the end of the day, you want him to remain as healthy as possible and last all year longer if you can. But by the same token, I'm trying to cut down work on myself as well. By me not saying anything will almost guarantee that he's going to end up spending some time in the athletic training room with me. So by just sharing that with him, hopefully he'll listen. Hopefully he'll learn from it, and hopefully he'll take it seriously. It's not coming from a coach or a teammate. It's coming from an athletic trainer. But also by the same token, like I said, I've been around long enough, and I've had to actually say something similar to some other veterans, not necessarily rookies, but veterans before, and they have respected my opinion and they have listened in the past. So hopefully that will bowl the same for him. But I would definitely at least try. I would try to talk some sense into him. I wouldn't just not say anything. So that's an interesting question, but I would definitely say something to him.
Yeah, and it feels like it's sort of that fine line, like with the Ravens when you talk about Lamar Jackson and his running ability,
Right,
where like,
right,
okay, what's that line? And I just wonder if like that's where you guys in that training room come in and say, this is where that line is. Because as a coach, that's a hard thing to tell a kid where that
right,
line is, because in the moment you're saying, hey, we've got to fight for every yard. You're telling your guys, hey, we've got to fight for that inches, because that's the difference between 4th and short or 1st and 10. So there's that fine line for the coaching staff where you don't want to make it like you're taking away a kid's ability. And that's the thing with Jane Daniel, that is sort of like the Lamar Jackson conversation. You don't want to look at him and say, don't be what made you great. And part of what made Jane Daniel great is the running ability and the
right,
toughness at downfield. But at the same time, if you're the Commanders, you're the training staff, you're the front office, you're saying, hey, this is a guy we're trying to make be our franchise guy for 10, 15 years. And he can't do that if he's running and getting injured and getting hurt as often as he is. But here's the other thing: as we start to look at the Commander offense as a whole, though, he's got weapons, DB. They've signed Austin Eckler. You already have Jihad Dotson. You have Terry McLaurin,
Scary Terry, right? Yeah,
which those are two big security blankets right there. I think Curtis
right.
Samuel is still. Now, hold on. I better check that on Curtis Samuel. Um, got some weapons, got a decent tight end. So on the offensive side of the ball, it feels like Washington, pardon me, by the way, Curtis Samuel is with the Bills right now, not with the Commanders. That is
Okay.
a faux pas on my part there, DB. But it feels like he's coming into an offense, though, that feels like, hey, protect the ball. You've got weapons on the outside. Make a couple big plays down the field for us. And I think defensively, they've got a little bit they're going to be playing catch up, even though I think Dan Quinn is going to get that ship right on the defense. It's just I don't think the pieces are there. But offensively, I think they're going to put up points, DB. What's your thoughts on the Commander offense?
I agree with you. Same way, he's got a lot of weapons. He should have a pretty decent running game to lean on. Like I said before, the question with Dan Quinn being a defensive minded coach, it'll be interesting to see what kind of changes they make on defense. But I see the offense being really exciting. You know, running through the quarterback, obviously. If, like you said, if he can be smart and slide when he needs to, and don't take unnecessary hits and stuff like that, he should do the offense. I think will be really productive. I do. I
Yeah.
don't see them making a ton of mistakes and stuff like that on offense as long as the quarterback stays upright and he stays healthy.
Well, and again, we've already touched on it. That's the big if with
Right.
Jay Daniel with the Commanders. But offensively, as I'm pulling up their roster right now as we speak. You have Brian Robinson Jr., former Ed Block recipient as well. They have De'Ami Brown, who they drafted. It's a very much a developed wide receiver room. They have Zach Ertz at tight end. They drafted Ben Sinnott, rookie out of Kansas State. If there is a question mark, you kind of look at the offensive line for the Commanders and say, not the name brands that you're used to seeing on there, and not the household names. I think on the other side of the ball, defensively, they're going to pay for the last couple of years of I do like the draft pick is Jahan Newton from Illinois, even though he's had some injury issues coming in. Can they get pressure on the quarterback to protect the back end that has Emmanuel Forbes? Trying to look through the roster right now. Emmanuel Forbes is really the biggest name on the roster I see at the moment for a corner. They're going to have to be able to protect a weaker secondary with a front that no longer has Chase Young or Montez Sweat. And I see you shaking your head. Like, that's a big thing to factor into this conversation about the Commanders.
Right.
You don't have a dominant defensive line anymore. Linebackers have always sort of been the last really 5 to 10 years not a big requirement for the Commanders because they've been so good in the front end, but they're also not real great in the back end right now.
Right. And no
So,
premier pass rusher.
yeah, I mean, like, you look at Jonathan Allen and you try to tell yourself, like, he can be the guy, but he really was the second or third best pass rusher when Chase Young and Montez Sweat were there. And now,
Right.
take those two guys away. Who as an offensive line are you going to focus on?
It's a good question.
And you're going to focus on Jonathan Allen, and you're going to say, somebody else has to beat me.
Somebody, right. And who is it?
Right.
We don't know right now.
Let's talk record prediction right here, right now for the Commanders. If you had to take a guess, you would say
9-8.
Ooh, I like that pick.
9-8.
I like
I
that.
really do think they're going to be a little bit more competitive than people think, though. I really do.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go 8-9. It's gonna sound like I'm just copying you, but flipping it. I'm going 8-9 because I think that the talent is there for this Commander team on offense to be able to win some games offensively. I think the defense is a little bit behind right now. And they're going to have to get the defense caught up, and I don't know if you can do that in the season. So I think they're a year away from, hey, all of a sudden we're talking about this is a 3-team division again with the Commanders sneaking into it. I don't think they're ready this year to do it.
Okay.
So let's go. We'll get to we'll save the Eagles for last.
Okay.
Let's talk about the Giants. Which they sort of feel like a mess. Is that the nice way to put it, DB?
Yeah, since you're being nice, yeah.
Because we all got to watch the Hard Knocks off season, and we got to see the Giants, and it didn't look like it was great there. Um, let's start there. Can the Giants survive in your eyes, DB, without Saquon Barkley?
They're gonna have to turn it up a notch on defense in order for that to happen. I don't think so. But next to who is it? Thibodeau on one side, and then they added Burns, I think, on the other side from the Panthers. So that's going to bolster up their pass rush a little bit. But I don't know about on the back end. I'm not sure what they have back there. I'm not sure what they have in the linebacking core. But in order for that to happen, the defense is going to have to play lights out, and I don't see that happening.
Yeah, because the one thing with the Giants that the last couple years I've thought is when Saquon Barkley's healthy, you've run your offense through Saquon Barkley.
Right.
Now who are you running that through? I mean, I know they signed Devin Singletary, who was with Brian Dable in Buffalo, but I mean, we've seen Devin Singletary try in two other places to be the bell cow, and he's just bounced around. It's not a knock on him, but he's not a guy you build your offense through. If he was, Houston wouldn't have went and got Joe Mixon. They would have kept Devin Singletary, and that would have been the guy. Now you're taking Saquon Barkley out. You bring in Devin Singletary, and Daniel Jones is throwing to Malik Neighbors. They don't have Sterling Shepard anymore, former Ed Block Courage Award recipient. They're going with some unknown guys. I know Isaiah Hodgins started to come on a little bit last year before the injuries, but I mean, I don't know if the Giants can win with Daniel Jones as the focal point of that offense. And you're right.
No.
Then can the defense carry them? And the defense is going through a change because Wink Martindale isn't there anymore.
Right, exactly.
And I don't know. The Giants just sort of feel like they're, to me, maybe the cautionary tale of you panic, you feel like you've got to pay your quarterback because you don't want to be left without one. And it's no knock on Daniel Jones. I think Daniel Jones is a serviceable NFL quarterback, but I don't think Daniel Jones can be a guy that can lead an offense. I think he's got to play in an offensive scheme that is complementary to what he does bring to the table. And
you don't want him dropping back and throwing the ball 30, 40 times a game. You can't win with that. You can't win like that. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I think he's a 20 to 25 type of guy. Hand it off.
Right.
You know where he would be great? Daniel Jones would be great in a Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay, not so much Zach Taylor, Kevin Stefanski type of offense that is so predicated on zone running and play action pass off your zone runs. That's where a guy like Daniel Jones works. If you go back to Duke, that was a lot of the Duke Blue Devil offense he played in was zone. We're going to set it up with the RPOs. We're going to set it up with the short passes off this run game. And I think not having Saquon Barkley now takes you out of that element to where you're asking a lot out of a guy that hasn't been able to prove yet that he can win like that at this level.
They also lost Darren Waller too, right? He retired or something like that.
He did retire, and then he went on a weird tangent afterwards.
Yeah. So they don't have a premier tight end, and they lost the tight end before him. I forget his name, who went to Jacksonville from Ole Miss. Right. So I don't even who's he throwing the ball to? Who's
Yeah,
he handing off the ball to?
I mean,
Who's
you just
protecting
look.
him?
You just yeah, you think the offensive line I thought got better for the Giants as the season went on, and they had flashes. I don't want it to be like we're sitting here being the negative Nancy's of um and just poo pooing the Giants. Like, no, the Giants have some capabilities here to be a tough team to play. But when you look up and down that roster, you just look at it and you say, where's the guy for the Giants on offense when I look at their okay, here are their wide receivers that they have on their roster right now. They have, and some of these guys I'm not going to name because they're probably practice squad guys, but they signed Miles Boykin, Isaiah Hodgins, Jalen Hyatt, Isaiah McKenzie, Malik Neighbors, Gunnar Ozeski, pardon me, Wandale Robinson, Allen Robinson, the second former Red Block recipient, and Darius Slayton. Take Malik Neighbors out of this because Malik Neighbors is going to be very good at this level. Who on that list do you hear that you sit there and say, wait a sec, I got to be prepared for that guy?
None of those guys scare me. None of those guys. And for you to say taking away Malik Neighbors, take his name out, that was going to be the only name I was going to name. Other than that, anybody else, I don't see them as being a big name threat this year. But who knows?
Yeah.
They got a lot of problems on that side. They got a lot of problems in New York. More problems than answers, I believe.
Yeah, huge problems. And then you got offensively on the O line, serviceable options. I like their tackles with Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal. I think Andrew Thomas gets a little bit of a bad rap because of how bad his career started off. But I think it will get better for him as it goes on. I'm a big John Runyon fan out of Michigan. He's one of their guards
Oh, yeah.
now. And go to the defensive side, and sort of like you talked about, you have Brian Burns, you have Kayvon Thibodeau, you have Dexter Lawrence. That's gonna be a tough front to have to line up against.
Right.
Secondary wise, I think that they have started a little bit to turn the corner. They went out and signed Trey Herndon, who's a very solid, not top tier guy, but solid tier. Deontay Banks out of Maryland, I think, is going to get better. They invested a high pick in him last year. DC is joining us here momentarily, so we'll get his thoughts in a moment. But it just sort of feels like when we talk about the Giants, it's just going to be this sort of thing of too many questions for them to overcome. DC,
Right.
Dwayne Clemens
What's
is
up,
here
man?
with us.
So
Welcome
sorry I
in,
got
sir.
involved this late.
All right. We're talking about the Giants right now. Give me your
Okay.
take on the New York Giants.
Definitely, I feel like they're a team on the rebound or the rebuild. Even though I feel like if their quarterback play was, spectacular this year, they just don't have enough top tier guys to really make any hay in the NFL this year.
So we were talking about the Daniel Jones stuff, and we're going to get record predictions here in a minute. But let me ask you, because DB and I both kind of agree, this sort of felt like this is that cautionary tale of just because you have a quarterback, you've got to have the right system around him for this to be successful, or you're going to pay a guy a lot of money and sort of have buyer's remorse. When you look at the Daniel Jones and the Giants situation, what do you make of it?
I do agree with you. I think when you pay a guy a lot of money and he's not proven himself to be a top 10 quarterback, you're always going to have buyer's remorse. I mean, I think they knew going into it, this guy was, but the quarterback market was hot, and kind of like how right now, everybody's just trying to grab somebody. They don't want to be, the one without a chair to sit in when the song cuts off. and they grabbed that guy. I think it was premature. He hadn't really proven himself, and without Saquon, I think it just continues to expose how little he can do especially when he doesn't have anything around him. And I don't even know if they even got protection for him. So it's kind of like there's so many things that are just against him.
All right, so before we move on, we're going to talk about the Eagles here in a minute. And we're going to take a break before our guest joins us to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Give me a record prediction. DC, we'll start with you for the Giants this year.
I think they're going to be hot trash, so I'm going to say 6-11.
DB?
Same, 6-11.
I'm gonna go 4-13. I think they're just it's going to be a struggle for them for a while.
Dang it!
Give a little bit of love, Dave.
Well, we've talked about it how many weeks, DC, about the not everybody can be in that we win 6 games. Like somebody's got to be the punching bag.
That's true.
Sort of feels like the Giants might end up being the punching bag here just a little bit.
And the NFC ain't even that strong, so that's what's even sadder. Like, god dang, Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the Eagles because I think this is the most fascinating conversation to have about any of the teams that we're going to talk about because they were so good. And by the end of the season, they were so bad. So, DC, I'm going to ask you this question because we heard the rumblings that there was some disconnect, there were some issues in that locker room. What is it like when a locker room has issues with a coach? What's that? How does that dynamic affect the on-the-field play?
I've been pretty fortunate. I don't think I've ever seen the entire team kind of pull back away from a coach. I've been seeing where key players, I was there when when Marvin Lewis and Chad got into a fight in the playoffs in the locker room, and it was like, holy crap. But that kind of pulled us apart, and we ended up losing that game, and that kind of became a thing for a minute. But I think when you have a major coaching issue, I think you can't help but lean towards the player's direction. And if the team ain't really feeling the leadership, ownership has to really take that to heart and say, listen, if the whole team is not jiving with you, then we got to either make a move or you got to really show me that you came to Jesus with these guys and you guys are truly on the same page. Otherwise, I would have thought that they would have tried to move on immediately because, that's just unacceptable to have a team that's good fall that fast, that quickly, and not really be able to explain it publicly, not really be able to, quantify it even internally, and it doesn't really look like it's fixed. I don't think anybody's looking at Philadelphia feeling, oh, they're coming into the season and they seem like a team that's still on the rise. They seem like a team that ever since they got there to that Super Bowl, they've been consistently sliding backwards. So I don't see them going up.
DB, let me get your thoughts on that topic.
Well, I can't speak from it like Dwayne can, but we as Saints, we had some issues during Katrina, and it wasn't necessarily, the players versus Coach Hazlitt or vice versa, but just having the problems that we had, and we ended up going 3-13 that year. So, just having any type of issue, not necessarily saying player versus coach, but I have been in a situation where it was just a messed up situation, period, just to be in during Katrina, and that affected us big time. But I've never been in a situation where the players didn't like the coach or vice versa. So I can't really speak on that from the standpoint that Dwayne can.
So I would guess,
and that doesn't happen a lot.
Right. Right.
What I will say, and just for the sake of this conversation and not sort of CYA, is that we're just going off the speculation of what we've seen, what has
Right.
been reported upon. We don't know any sort of inside information. This is just our loose opinions off what we've seen and what we've heard. But I just wonder if it got as bad as it looks like it did, where you had some conversations about maybe Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni aren't on the same page. Like, can one off season solve all of this for the Eagles? And can you put that back together in one off season? That's the question that I have. And I don't know what that answer is.
It's hard to get poop back in the horse.
Well, I think. Well, that's true. I think it can be done. It just kind of depends on, like, we all three of us. We don't know exactly what went on, but we know something went on. If whatever it is that went on is a fix, like, okay, what was the coach's name that was there, that was from New England, that was in Detroit?
We got the name. The one he fired, the
defensive
defensive
coordinator.
corner. Yeah, he's the one he
Yeah,
fired.
he was in New England. Yeah, he was in New England too.
Oh, Matt Patricia.
And yeah, Patricia. It was rumored that, they didn't like, what he was doing on defense, or, it just seems like, you look at both sides of the ball, and it seems like, from my standpoint, the defense had the worst fall off between the offense and the defense. And especially in the postseason and against Tampa Bay, I've never seen tackling that worse before. So, if Vic Fangio comes in and, he can come in and he can kind of turn that around a little bit, I could see that happening if the problem is that small, if it's just a coaching philosophy on the defensive side of the ball. But if it's more problems than that, then we actually know, then D might be right. It's kind of hard to put the poop back in the horse once it comes out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I'm thinking Vic Fangio can make some sort of difference with that defense.
Dave, how many games did they lose in a row at the end of the season?
I believe
They lost 5 or 6.
I think it was 5 in a row.
Yeah. See, that kind of skid is like you can't. That's hard to get out your head when you going into your next fight, especially starting this season. And you like, man, we really hit the bed, and it's like, you saw that you can't get that smell out your nose. So I'm having a real tough time believing that they're gonna be instantly over it and gonna be able to just bounce back without. Because I didn't see them really get better off the field as far as personnel-wise. So that means it's really got to come from within. And they've lost their 2 key leaders on defense and on offense. So, I mean, how could they possibly be the same?
And by the way, just so as we're talking about it, after they beat the Bills November 26th, 37-34 in overtime, they won one of their last 6 games. They went 1-5 to finish the season, and then had that playoff game against the Buccaneers where Tampa Bay just could do what they wanted.
Turn Baker into a hero. Got that man paid.
Hey, sometimes that's all it takes. I do, like, I look at the Eagles and I say, even losing. And I think it's if they have issues, it cannot be understated what you just said, that you lost 2 big clubhouse figures in Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox. Those are those guys that are the calming influence, the guys that say, hey, we stick to this. This is going to work. Like, rally the troops. That not being there, if it goes south, that's one of the places you start to point. But there is too much talent on this Eagle team for them to not be contending for the NFC East crown. Oh, we just lost the TV. How about that? So
Yeah, especially with Dallas possibly shaky because of their personnel and the management not seeming to have a good connection. And I think New York is obviously don't got a quarterback. So yeah, this is a year they could take that division.
Yeah, I just don't see them being a very dominant team as we've seen in the years past because of the fact that you're asking a lot of a team that is essentially coming back with the same coach that it kind of fell apart, and it fell apart very quickly on so give me your kind of thoughts on the record here for the Eagles you take a look at before we step aside and bring in our guests to help preview the NFC East. Preview the Cowboys.
Let's see. I think Washington's gonna have their way with them. I think Dallas is gonna have their way with them. I'm gonna say 8-9.
Oh, 8-9. You know what? That's not a terrible pick. Brett's gonna hate you for that. I'm just telling you right now.
I understand. I'm doing the math, and it's just like you lost two Hall of Famers. You didn't go out and get better on your coaching staff. I don't feel like I don't see it.
I'm gonna go 11-6 because I think that there's enough talent to win them games. I think the questions in Dallas are going to be too much. I think Washington, we talked about them earlier. I like the Commanders. I like where they're going. I just don't think defensively they have the pieces yet. The Giants aren't going to be very good. They can make hay in their division. I think their problem is going to be when they have to go outside the NFC East. Then it's going to get into, okay, now do you have the pieces to compete for the NFC or to win the Super Bowl? And the answer is I don't think they do.
No, they can't be Frisco or Detroit. So that buck's gonna stop.
That's right. All right.
Maybe
Well,
not even Chicago. Who knows?
and you know what? Next week, we're going to preview the NFC North. So that'll be a fun conversation. We have one more team to talk about here, and we have a very special guest joining us right after this. All right, we mentioned we got one more team in our NFC East preview to talk about, and that takes us to Dallas, Texas, and the Dallas Cowboys. You actually heard from the Dallas Cowboys Courage House a little earlier in the show. Happy Hill Farm is our Courage House of the week, so good time to bring on the guy who is the host of the Locked On Cowboys podcast and a Locked On Dynasty podcast. He's a writer at the 33rd Team football page. Everybody, Marcus Mosher, kind enough to take some time with us. Marcus, how are you? And I'm sure you're getting excited for the season just like we are.
Oh, this is the best time of year, right? Every team has high hopes. We're getting ready for all these big games, except for the Cowboy fans. I think the Cowboy fans, their hopes and dreams are dashed. However, this is still a pretty good team, but I've never seen the energy and the enthusiasm so low for this Dallas team.
So let's start right there. Is that a product of the uncertainty of the contract futures of Dak Prescott and CD Lamb? Is that the cloud that's kind of keeping excitement at bay?
No, I don't think so, because I think there's a good chance that the Cowboys will get both deals done before week 1. But I don't think those are going to necessarily make Cowboy fans believe now that they're going to go make a deep run into the postseason. I just think this is something else that's been hanging over the Cowboys. I think it's the fact that they've won 12-5 now in 3 consecutive seasons. 2 times they've lost in the wild card round. Twice they've lost at home. There's just this sense of we're not going to get over the hump. If we couldn't get over the hump with last year's team, this team looks worse on paper. How is it going to happen now? And it feels like we're just waiting for the inevitable, which is a complete rebuild in 2025. You're talking about a new coach, an entirely new roster. So there does feel like a little bit of a waiting game here.
So does it feel like you guys kind of want to tank this season? Is this some diabolical Jerry plan that, like, I clearly didn't make any moves. I didn't do anything profound for my team to actually make a playoff run, and now I got all this uncertainty around my core.
No, I there's no plans to tank. But let's talk about Jerry Jones saying he's all in with this 2024 team. I think when he said that comment back in January or February, I don't even remember when he said it. I think a lot of people assumed that they were going to be all in, like the Rams were all in with Matt Stafford, right? Where they're trading first round picks, they're making big signings. That's not what he meant. What he meant was we are all in with this version of the team. And if this version doesn't work, then we're potentially tearing it down to the studs in 2025. So I don't think Jerry Jones wanted to throw any more money, any more future draft picks in this team. He wanted Mike McCarthy in his current roster to have one more go at it. And if they can't get it done, you're going to see a big shift next year.
Doesn't it feel like he's kind of hobbled them if he's trying to get it done? I mean, for a guy that's trying to give him a chance, it's kind of like, wow, this ain't feeling like a great chance.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't think the Cowboys front office has given them the best possible chance of succeeding this year. I mean, they made almost zero free agent acquisitions. They signed Eric Kendricks. They brought back Ezekiel Elliott, and that was it. Like, that's the entire offseason, right? But I also understand the point of, like, last year's team was as healthy as you'll ever be. They had talent at every single position, and they got the doors blown off of them at home to a 7th seed. I don't know if there's a move or two moves that they could have made this offseason that would have gotten people really excited and believing that they could get over this hump. So in some ways, I think Jerry Jones is crazy like a fox, right? And not investing more assets into this. But I do understand why there are people that are more down on this Cowboys team entering the season.
In terms of Dak, and we talk about the contract, we were talking a little while ago about Daniel Jones and the Giants, and it's sort of that buyer. The Giants sort of feel like they have buyer's remorse when it comes to Daniel Jones. When you look at the Cowboys and the Dak Prescott situation, realistically, where do you think the money value for his contract's going to be?
It's a very good question. I think if the Cowboys were to sign him to a deal, let's say before week 1, I think we're talking low 60s, 62, 63 million a year, probably a 3 or 4 year deal. I think Dak wants to continue these short deals. Now, but if he hits free agency next year and plays out the 2024 season, that's what I think we're starting to talk about, like upper 60s and maybe even low 70s. When you have multiple teams bidding on him in the open market, that's when I think this is going to get out of control. But if he were to sign a deal before the season, I think 62, 63 million a season is about right.
I see the look on DC's face.
So what do you want to see as a fan? Do you want to say, man, I almost rather us kind of get these higher draft picks, if we're not going to put the money in the deck and we're not going to pay him and we're not going to, make a real run at this thing? Does it feel better to say, go ahead and let the wheels kind of fall off and we can get some high draft picks, have some trade value, some capital, and go ahead and just accept our fate that Dak is more of a Kirk Cousins type quarterback? He's going to win some regular season games. He's always going to make big plays. But when it comes to the really big games and the games that matter in the playoffs, you just don't really feel like he's going to get you there.
It's a great question. And I think my answer depends on the day, to be honest with you, because I can see both sides of this, right? Like, if they don't get it done this year, how are you ever going to put a team around Dak that's better than what he has now? And now all of a sudden, Dak is the highest paid quarterback in the league. CeeDee Lamb is the highest paid receiver in the league. Micah Parsons is going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. Tyler Smith, who I think a lot of people believe he could be the next great guard in the NFL, he's going to take up a big chunk of your money. It's hard to imagine the team is going to be better than it is right now. At the same time, it's really hard to find quarterbacks, right? Dak finished second in the MVP last year. Anytime that he's on the field, the Cowboys have one of the top offenses in the league. And you think, maybe this could be a Matt Stafford situation where you just luck out in the right year, he stays healthy, and you hit on a couple of draft picks, and all of a sudden you're in the Super Bowl. That's probably the path that I would go. Just maybe one of these years, the ball will bounce your way in the playoffs, because going back into that abyss of trying to find a franchise quarterback, when I grew up in the Chad Hutchinson, Quincy Carter, Drew Henson era, I kind of like the idea of keeping Dak around and at least hanging around the rim when it comes to the playoffs.
One
Let's
more
get
follow
in.
up. Oh,
Go ahead. No, go
Is
ahead,
it
TC.
worth taking the chance on trying to draft a quarterback with the price being so damn high? I mean, look at Brock Purdy and what he's doing for Frisco.
I mean, yeah, I think there's some appeal to that, right? However, it's, do you trust the people in charge in the front office and the ownership to get it right? And the Cowboys have had a lot of success with quarterbacks, like Tony Romo that was undrafted. Dak was a 4th-round pick, but you look back at all the sliding door moments, right? Like they loved Paxton Lynch, but they couldn't trade up for Paxton Lynch because the Broncos did. They almost drafted Johnny Manziel. Jerry Jones loved Johnny Manziel. They had to get talked out of that. Connor Cook was somebody that Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones loved. Their quarterback coach, Wes Phillips, had to talk them into Dak Prescott over Connor Cook. So I can see both sides of this. I probably would rather just keep Dak and try to figure out things around the fringes.
Let's get into some of the X's and O's stuff. I take away CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. If the Cowboys are going to be a real threat this year, who's going to be the big part offensively that's going to help CeeDee and Dak carry this offense?
It's probably going to be Jake Ferguson, their 3rd-year tight end out of Wisconsin. Now, Ferguson had a really strong sophomore season. And in the playoff game, and I know that was a loss, but 10 catches for 93 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like, you saw him emerging. In the NFL, we usually see the 3rd season is when these tight ends take a big leap. If he can be somebody not on the Sam Laporta or Mark Andrews type of tight end, but just a reliable option so that when CeeDee Lamb's getting doubled or it's 3rd and 5 and you just need somebody to get open in the middle of the field, I think it's Jake Ferguson is the guy that the Cowboys really need to take another step this year to make their offense even better.
If on somehow, some way, if you somehow lost Dak and CeeDee Lamb, would Cowboy Nation ever forgive Jerry?
I don't think so. Now I think the Dak Prescott one, I wouldn't advise it, but I think you can at least talk yourself into it, right? The CeeDee Lamb one makes no sense, right? Like, whether you have Dak or a rookie quarterback, you're going to need a number 1 receiver. And CeeDee Lamb is 25 years old, coming off the best season of his career. He can play on the outside. He can play in the slot. He can play in the backfield. He had 180 targets last year and remained one of the most efficient receivers in the league. Plus, he's everything you want behind the scenes. He works really hard. He doesn't complain about not getting the football. He'll block. I just can't envision any scenario where you would want to get rid of that player. I think you would see Cowboy fans revolt more if they lost CeeDee compared to Dak.
Oh, interesting comment. And you know, there is a point to that I would agree with that, because if you do decide, okay, you're not going to keep Dak Prescott, which, look, there's going to be a lot of teams that this is going to be the norm. This is the conversation that's going to happen, because as we've talked about for weeks on this show, the quarterback money is getting ridiculous. And it's not, when I say ridiculous, it's not that these guys are not deserving. It's just, we're talking about huge financial investments in these players.
Yes.
But if you pass on Dak Prescott because you say that's too much, but then don't keep CeeDee Lamb, then what are you giving the next quarterback of the Cowboys?
Nothing. You're giving them nothing to work with. And if you look at a couple teams, look at the New England Patriots right now. They drafted Drake May with the 3rd overall pick. They're really excited about him, but they have no receivers to throw him the ball. And now they're trying to go out and get somebody like Brandon Ayuk, and they're offering, 1st-round pick, and we'll give him a, $32 million a year. Those receivers don't want to come to play with a rookie quarterback, right? Because they know their production is likely going to drop off. And it's really hard to go out and acquire those guys. Teams just aren't giving away top 5 receivers in the NFL unless there's an age issue, a contract issue. I think the Cowboys, and I think they will. I would be shocked if CeeDee Lamb doesn't have a new deal probably in the next 2 weeks. it just makes all the sense in the world, whether they're rebuilding, they're going all in, to have him on your roster.
Do you think wide receivers in the NFL are starting to see what happened to Devontae Adams and are saying, like, hold on, I'm not going to an unstable quarterback head coach situation, brand new nothing, because this man went from being all everything in the NFL to now he's kind of like being an afterthought.
Well, and Devontae Adams has put up some pretty good numbers with the Raiders. However, nobody's talking about him as the best receiver in the league anymore. And I'm not sure that he's not, but it's just that case. If you're playing on a 7-win team and you're not having all these primetime games, you just don't get noticed as much as a CeeDee Lamb who's playing on every primetime game, or Tyreek Hill, or whatever, So I do think there's some of that to them. And again, if you are a CeeDee Lamb, do you really want to go play for the New England Patriots and a rebuilding team? No, I think you want to stay in a situation where your profile can remain high and you can continue to put up huge numbers. And if CeeDee sticks around and sticks with Dak, I've got to assume that he's going to be putting up 1,400-yard, 1,500-yard seasons for the next half decade.
What do the Cowboys need to do to get past the Eagles in the NFC East?
Well, they were past the Eagles last year. In fact, and I think a lot of people even forget that the Cowboys won the division last year, right? Now, it was at the very end of the season, right? So maybe we don't give them a lot of credit for that. But to me, it's the run game, right? If the Cowboys want to be a better team against quality opponents, you got to be able to run the ball. Now, they don't need to be the 49ers and averaging 150 yards rushing a game, but they need to have a rushing attack that can be effective when opponents know they're going to run the ball. Last year, we saw games like Buffalo and Miami, some bad weather games where the Cowboys needed to lean on the rushing attack, and they just didn't have it. Now, the offensive line's younger this year. I think the Cowboys are hoping that's going to help. The running back situation is not as good. Ezekiel Elliott is 29 years old. Rico Dowdle is kind of a journeyman. Royce Freeman is somebody who's trying to fit onto this roster. They don't have the running backs to have a solid run game, but they're hoping the offensive line is so good that it doesn't matter.
All right, Marcus, we're going to get – oh, I'm sorry, DC. Go ahead.
So let's just play a quick game here. If you had to lose one of those three big ones, Micah, CeeDee, and Dak, who do you think will go on to have the most success outside of the Cowboys if they leave?
I probably would say Dak, because I think if Dak leaves, he's only leaving for a better situation. Dak's a smart guy, right? He's not going to leave and go to a bad team, right? He's going to be very, very careful to make sure that he's picking a team that has a good offensive line, a good play caller, and weapons galore. So I do think it's probably Dak. And I think that's what's so appealing to Dak about not signing a deal is if he could get into free agency next year, what would his options look like, right? Like, would a team like maybe the Giants, who have Malik Neighbors, could they potentially have, pair Bill Belichick and Dak Prescott together? I think that's really interesting. There's a couple other situations around the league that I think would be pretty enticing to Dak. So I'll pick Dak here.
All right, Marcus, we're going to get you out of here on this. Give me a record prediction for the Dallas Cowboys this year.
So their schedule is quite a bit harder than it was last year. They play the AFC North this year. They have some games against the 49ers and the Lions outside of their divisional matchups. I think they're going to be 2 games worse than they were last year. I'll go 10-7. I think Philly probably will win the division, although I'm kind of down on this Philly team after that utter collapse at the end of last year. But I think they'll be a 10-7, probably the 5 or 6 seed in the NFC. And we'll see from there.
All right. Well, Marcus, thank you for taking some time with us to help talk about the Dallas Cowboys. You can listen to him on the Locked On Cowboys podcast, the Locked On Dynasty podcast, a part of the Locked On Network, and he's a writer over at the 33rd Team. Thank you for taking some time with us, sir.
Of course, anytime.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes.
That is going to do it for us on this week's edition of the Block CourageCast. For Dwayne Brooks, for Dwayne Clemens, for Wally Williams, who's coaching, I'm Dave Stamel. So long.